You stand on the edge of a world that once hummed with divine power. The air is thick with forgotten names, with lost gods whose stories have been swallowed by time. But there is one name that lingers, a name that calls to the deep places, the shadowed spaces. Kumarbi, the god who bit the sky. A whisper travels through the wind, the softest breath. As if the god himself stirs beneath the surface of the world, you feel it the pull of a forgotten power, a curse and a blessing intertwined. The air grows heavy, pressing against your chest, as if something ancient and terrible is drawing near. You have heard of Kumarbi before, in the faint echoes of old stories, but now you can almost hear his voice, distant but close, as if he were just beyond the veil of the world, waiting for you. It is said that Kumarbi was born from the earth itself, a primordial god, forged in the belly of the world, an offspring of darkness and rock. His form, immense and unyielding, towered above the land, his mind forever tied to the fate of the earth beneath his feet. His presence was felt in the tremors that ran through the ground, in the way the very soil seemed to shift with his moods. He was not a god of the heavens, no, but of the deep places, the caves and the chasms, where the earth's blood flowed. But it was not enough for Kumarbi to rule the earth. The sky, that vast and endless expanse, called to him. And so, in a moment of unimaginable defiance, he raised his mighty jaws and sank his teeth into the very heavens. The sky bled, torn open by the god's bite. The world trembled as his fangs, powerful and sharp, broke through the celestial dome, creating a rift that no god had ever dared to touch. Some say the heavens wept that day, their tears falling as rain upon the earth, while others claim the stars themselves dimmed in sorrow, for the sky was never meant to be wounded. It was said that the gods who ruled the heavens trembled at Kumarbi's audacity, for he had broken a divine covenant, defying the order of the cosmos. But still he stood, his enormous form towering over the earth. He laughed a sound that echoed through the cracks in the sky. The sky's wound, where Kumarbi had bitten, never healed. It became a scar upon the heavens, a mark of defiance that remained, even as time passed and the gods above retreated in fear. Those who still worshipped Kumarbi spoke of the wound in the sky as a symbol of his power, of his ability to defy the gods who ruled the heavens. It was said that this wound, this bite, was the very reason the stars flickered, for they were not free to shine as they once had. They were bound by the fracture in the sky, cursed by Kumarbi's wrath. And yet even now, the gods who ruled the heavens dared not speak his name, for to do so would be to invoke his curse, to awaken a power long thought dormant. But you, standing at the edge of this forgotten knowledge, can feel it stirring just beneath the surface, just behind the veil. Kumarbi's bite is still there, still echoing, still waiting. In the quiet moments of the night, when the stars grow dim and the earth breathes in silence, you can almost hear the gods whisper. It is a call to those brave enough or foolish enough to seek the forbidden truths, to gaze upon the wound in the sky and understand its meaning. And so, you stand on the precipice, waiting, listening for the faintest trace of the god who bit the sky. Now, let's get started with today's story. You feel the earth beneath your feet tremble, as if something deep within its heart is stirring. The air grows thick with a strange pressure, a force that presses against you, making the world feel heavy and distorted. It's as though the very ground itself is breathing, rising and falling in rhythm with something ancient and immense. Kumarbi's story begins not in the heavens, but deep within the earth. A titan, a god formed from the primal elements, born from the bones of the world itself. He was a force of nature, a being of unimaginable size and strength, his body forged from rock and soil. His presence was not felt as a whisper, but as a deep, resonating pulse, like the beating heart of the earth itself. His essence was the very foundation of creation, a living embodiment of the earth's will. In those early days, before the world was divided into the heavens and the earth, Kumarbi's power was unrivaled. He was not a god of light or of the sky, but a god of the underworld, of the deep, uncharted places that lay hidden beneath the surface, the darkness of the caves, the vastness of the mountains, the stillness of the subterranean rivers. All these were Kumarbi's domain. He ruled with an iron will, his power unquestioned by the other gods who dwelled above him. The sky in all its beauty was an alien concept to him. His kingdom lay beneath, in the shadows, where the light of the sun could not reach. And yet, despite his power, something stirred within Kumarbi, longing for more. The earth, though vast and magnificent, felt confining. The gods above, those who ruled the heavens, seemed to hold dominion over something Kumarbi could not fathom, the infinite expanse of the sky. He would often gaze upward, feeling the winds that swept through the heavens, feeling the distant call of the sun and stars. It was a call he could not ignore. At first, Kumarbi tried to dismiss these desires, focusing instead on his domain beneath the earth. But as time wore on, the longing grew stronger, gnawing at him from the inside. The sky, with all its majesty, became an obsession. The stars, those tiny pinpricks of light, called to him like distant fireflies, urging him to reach higher, to break free from the confines of the earth. In the deep caverns of his lair, Kumarbi began to craft his plan. He knew that no god had ever dared challenge the sky, and for good reason. The heavens were sacred, untouchable. But Kumarbi was not like other gods. His mind was as sharp as the jagged stones of the earth. He was willing to risk everything for the taste of something greater. And so, beneath the weight of the earth, Kumarbi gathered his strength, preparing for the impossible. His body grew stronger, his will more determined, and his spirit became consumed with the idea of defying the heavens. There was no hesitation, no moment of doubt. He would rise, he would bite the sky. The moment came, as all moments do, with the quiet whisper of fate stirring in the wind. Kumarbi's massive form, greater than any titan who had walked before him, rose from the depths of the earth. The very ground trembled as he began to ascend, his body moving with a slow, deliberate grace that seemed unnatural for one so immense. The earth cracked beneath his weight, and the sky seemed to shift, as if it too had felt the stirring of the great god below. As Kumarbi rose, he could feel the pull of the heavens above him, the weight of the sky pressing down like a great weight upon his shoulders. He was no longer confined to the darkness of the earth, but free to reach for the stars, to grasp the very essence of the heavens in his hands. His first step was slow, his massive foot sinking deep into the earth. The land cracked and split beneath his weight, but he did not falter. He pressed on, rising higher and higher, until finally, his great head broke through the surface of the world. The sky, once so distant, was now within his grasp. It was here, at the cusp of the world, that Kumarbi gazed up at the heavens. His enormous eyes, like twin pools of molten stone, stared into the vast expanse of the sky. And with a roar that shook the earth to its core, Kumarbi leaped toward the heavens, his body moving with an unexpected swiftness. He opened his jaws wide, his teeth gleaming like obsidian, and with a mighty bite, he sank his fangs into the sky. The heavens screamed, their very fabric tearing beneath his power. The stars flickered and dimmed as Kumarbi's teeth pierced through the celestial dome. The sky, once impenetrable and sacred, was no more. It had been broken, torn open by a god who was not meant to exist. The world trembled as the rift in the sky widened, and the gods above, who had once ruled the heavens with impunity, watched in horror as Kumarbi's bite split the very foundations of their realm. The divine order, so carefully constructed over eons, began to crumble under the weight of the earth's god's defiance. And yet, even as the sky bled, Kumarbi stood tall, unshaken by the destruction he had wrought. He had done it. He had broken the sky. The heavens were no longer safe. The world was his. The echoes of his actions reverberated through the fabric of the cosmos, a rippling wave of defiance that could not be undone. Kumarbi, the god who bit the sky, had altered the course of creation itself. There would be no going back. The earth would never be the same again. Beneath the surface of the earth, in the shadowed places where light does not dare to tread, the followers of Kumarbi gather. Their rituals are whispered in the dark, passed from one generation to the next, each one more secretive, more dangerous than the last. There is no grand temple for Kumarbi, no marble altars or statues to honor him. His worship is primal, born from the earth itself. It is an ancient faith, bound to the very rocks and soil, hidden away from the prying eyes of the gods who reign in the heavens above. These are not the rituals of the common people, or are they the rites of the sky gods who demand offerings of incense and wine? The worship of Kumarbi is different. It is raw, elemental, a communion with the god who bites the sky, His followers are not afraid to stand at the edge of the abyss, to look into the rift he has created and feel its power. They know what is at stake, what it means to invoke his name. The rituals themselves are simple, but their power is immeasurable. The followers of Kumarbi gather in hidden caves, in grottos deep beneath the earth's surface, where the stone is cold and the air is thick with the smell of damp earth. There, in the silence of the dark, they carve strange symbols into the walls, symbols that resemble the jagged teeth of a god who once tore apart the heavens. The markings are drawn in red ochre, in blood, in the sweat of those who have come to seek the god's favor. The symbols are not just decorative, they are meant to channel the god's power, to draw down the very energy of the earth and the sky. Each line, each curve, each marking is a key, a link in a chain that binds the earth to the heavens, the living to the divine. The followers do not fully understand how the symbols work, only that they do. It is an ancient knowledge, passed down from those who came before, a secret so powerful that to speak of it aloud is to risk utter destruction. Once the symbols are drawn, the worshippers begin the chant. It is not a song of praise, but a call of summons. The air grows thick with tension as the followers raise their voices, speaking in a language lost to time. The words are unintelligible to those who have not been initiated, but they are potent, ancient syllables that stir the very bones of the earth. The sound is not like a prayer, but more like an incantation, a binding spell that seeks to pull Kumarbi from the dark places where he resides. As the chant grows louder, the ground beneath them begins to shake. At first, it is subtle, a gentle tremor, but soon it becomes a violent shaking, as though the earth itself is alive, responding to the call of its god. The walls of the cave tremble, the stones shift, and the air becomes thick with the scent of burning incense, the acrid temps of earth and sulfur. It is then that the followers know they are being heard. They are calling to Kumarbi, and he is listening. In this moment, the god's presence is felt, not as a voice or a figure, but as a force. The very air becomes charged with energy, and the worshippers are caught in a whirlwind of power. Some fall to their knees, overcome by the intensity of the sensation, while others remain standing, their eyes closed in reverence. The ground beneath them begins to split, as though Kumarbi himself is reaching up from the depths, his fingers breaking through the earth to claim what is his. For those who are worthy, those whose devotion is pure, the ritual ends with a blessing. It is not a blessing of light, as one might expect from the sky gods, but a blessing of strength. The followers feel their bodies grow heavy with power, their muscles growing taut, as if they have been imbued with the very essence of the earth itself. It is a gift that comes at a cost. The more they partake in the ritual, the more they lose themselves in Kumarbi's presence. Their spirits begin to fracture, their minds becoming tangled with the god's will, until they no longer remember who they were before they began their worship. There are whispers among the followers of a hidden truth. It's a forbidden ritual that can bring one closer to Kumarbi's true form. It is said that those who perform this final rite will transcend their mortal bodies, becoming one with the god. Their flesh will merge with the earth, their souls will bind to the sky. But it is not a ritual for the faint of heart. The cost is unimaginable, and those who attempt it are often lost, their minds shattered by the weight of the transformation. No one knows for certain what happens to those who attempt this final act of devotion. Some say they are consumed by Kumarbi, their bodies devoured by the earth itself. Others claim that they are cast into the rift in the sky, where the god's bite remains, forever lost in the heavens. But one thing is certain, those who partake in this ritual are never the same. They are marked by the god, and their fates are sealed. And so, the worship of Kumarbi continues, hidden away in the dark places of the world, far from the prying eyes of the heavens. It is a faith built on power, on strength, and on the knowledge that the God who bit the sky still waits, patiently, for those who dare to seek him. The blessing of Kumarbi is not one that is easily sought, nor one that comes without its price. For the followers who devote themselves to the god, it is a gift that transcends mere mortal desires. It is not the gentle blessing of peace or prosperity, but a dark, consuming force that wraps itself around the very soul of the recipient, changing them irrevocably. The ritual to receive this blessing begins as all rituals of Kumarbi do in secret. Deep in the caverns, hidden from the world above, the followers gather in silence, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods.
Ow.
The air is thick with incense, the scent of burning herbs and the sharp temps of sulfur, a mixture that stings the nostrils and makes the very walls of the cave seem to close in around them. The followers circle a great stone altar, ancient and cracked, weathered by centuries of use. Upon it, a single dark object rests, a shard of the sky itself, a remnant of the great rift Kumarbi created when he bit the heavens. It is said that this shard holds the power of the god within it, a fragment of his essence, both terrifying and divine. Followers know that by offering themselves to this object, they may receive Kumarbi's blessing, but it is a dangerous game. The first step is to shed one's mortal self. The followers remove their clothing, standing naked before the altar, their bodies vulnerable, exposed. It is a ritual of humility, but also one of surrender. They are no longer individuals, they are vessels, awaiting the god's touch. Their eyes are wide, their breath shallow, as they step forward one by one, each holding a small, jagged stone. This is the key to the blessing, the sacrifice. The stones are not just symbolic, they are instruments of pain. The followers press them against their own skin, drawing blood in slow, deliberate motions. The blood is meant to offer their very life force to Kumarbi, to show their devotion and willingness to be consumed by the god's power. As the blood flows, it is collected in small bowls, placed in the center of the circle. This is the offering. This is the price. Once the blood has been gathered, the ritual becomes more intense. The leader of the worshippers, an elder figure cloaked in tattered robes, steps forward. His face is hidden by a dark mask, his voice low and reverent. He chants the ancient words that resonate with power, words that cannot be understood, but that shake the very foundations of the earth. The air thickens with energy, the walls of the cave seeming to pulse with life. As the chant reaches its crescendo, the shard of the sky is lifted high. The leader holds it above his head, his hands trembling as he prepares to make the final offering. The shard gleams in the dim light, its edges sharp and unforgiving. The followers, now trembling themselves, bow their heads, awaiting the blessing. They know that they are on the brink of something impossible, communion with the God who once tore the heavens apart. The blessing comes not in the form of light, but in darkness. As the shard touches the blood, the cave plunges into complete blackness. The shadows seem to grow, to reach out with tendrils of cold wrapping around the worshippers. It is then that the followers feel it, the god's touch. It begins as a slight tremor in the bones, an unsettling sensation that crawls up the spine and spreads throughout the body. It is not a warm embrace, but a cold grip, like the touch of stone on flesh. The followers feel their bodies becoming heavy, as if weighed down by an unseen force. Their hearts beat faster, their breath quickens. The god is coming. In that moment, they know they are no longer in control. Kumarbi has entered their minds, their souls. They feel his presence, as if he is standing beside them, towering over them, filling every inch of their being. The god's power floods into their veins, flowing like molten rock through their bodies. It is a power that brings both strength and destruction. They can feel it tearing them apart, the god's essence mingling with their own. Their bodies convulse, their muscles locking and twitching as the power of Kumarbi courses through them. Some fall to the ground, writhing in agony, while others remain standing, their eyes wide with the shock of transformation. The blessing is not a gift, it is a taking. The god consumes them, slowly, piece by piece. Their mortal selves are peeled away, their identities lost in the flood of divine power. For a brief moment, they glimpse something beyond the veil of vision of the god's true form. It is not a being of flesh and bone, but a force, a presence that fills the very air with its weight. Kumarbi is not merely a god. He is the embodiment of the earth's wrath, the sky's bite. His essence is raw and primal, untamed. And those who receive his blessing are forever changed. When the ritual is over, the followers are left in a state of exhaustion, their bodies spent, their spirits cracked. Some have fallen into a deep sleep, their minds shattered by the sheer force of the god's power. Others remain, but they are not the same. Their eyes are hollow, their movements slow, as if they are no longer fully present in the world. The blessing of Kumarbi is a curse, a gift that comes at a terrible cost. To receive it is to lose oneself, to become a part of something greater, something darker. The followers who remain, those who have not been consumed by the god's power, continue their worship, but they do so in silence, knowing that they are now bound to Kumarbi forever. And so, the cycle continues. The god who bit the sky continues to give his blessing, but those who receive it are never the same. They are lost to the earth, to the sky, to the darkness that now dwells within them. Kumarbi's rise to power did not go unnoticed by the heavens. The gods who ruled the sky, those who held dominion over the stars, the winds, and the very fabric of the cosmos, felt the tremors of his defiance. The moment he bit into the sky, the divine order was fractured, and the heavens, once unshakable, began to quiver. But it was not just a break in the celestial dome, it was a declaration of war. The sky gods, furious at the audacity of the earth god, gathered in council. They knew the earth in its primal form had birthed many powerful beings, but none had dared to challenge the heavens in such a way. Kumarbi was different. He was no mere titan. He was an embodiment of nature's raw, uncontrollable power. His war would not be fought with armies or weapons, but with the forces that shaped the very world itself. It is said that the gods of the sky, led by a figure whose name was erased from history, convened in the great celestial halls where the stars themselves shimmered like the finest jewels. They were terrified. The sky, their kingdom, their very domain, had been breached. In their panic, they sent emissaries to the earth, seeking peace, seeking a way to restore the balance. But Kumarbi, now drunk on the power he had awakened, would not hear their pleas. Instead, he called upon his followers, his most devout, to prepare for the war that would shake the heavens themselves. It was not a war of armies, no. Kumarbi's forces were not made of men or beasts. Its army was the earth itself, the very stones, the mountains, the rivers, forces that could not be controlled. He summoned earthquakes that split the land, mountains that rose from the earth to meet the sky, and floods that surged through the heavens, crashing down like divine storms. The first blow struck when Kumarbi, his great form silhouetted against the breaking sky, reached up with his massive hands, his fingers now the very embodiment of the earth's fury. With a deafening roar, he tore through the heavens once more, widening the rift he had created. It is said that the stars fell in those moments, like fire raining down from the sky, and the gods above trembled at the force of his anger. The sky gods retaliated, of course. They summoned their winds, their tempests, their fires from the deepest pits of their realm. But their efforts were in vain. Kumarbi's power was too great, too elemental, too untamed. The earth itself was his weapon, and it moved with a force that the sky could not match. The winds of the heavens were torn apart by the weight of the earth's response. In the midst of this war, something strange began to happen. The more the sky gods fought, the more the heavens themselves seemed to falter. The stars dimmed even further, their light flickering like dying embers. The sky, once a brilliant canvas of light and order, began to crack, revealing the dark, empty void beneath. It was as if the heavens themselves were retreating, giving way to the raw power of the earth. And then, in a moment of desperation, the sky gods turned to a forbidden weapon: time. It is said that the sky gods have the ability to manipulate time itself, to twist its flow and bring forth moments from the past or future. In an attempt to undo Kumarbi's war, they reached into the very fabric of existence, seeking to rewrite history, to erase the gods' bite from the heavens. But time, like the sky, was now beyond their control. The more they reached, the more they found themselves tangled in the web of their own creation. Kumarbi, sensing their desperation, laughed. His laughter echoed through the rift he had created, and the earth trembled once more. He knew that the war was his to win, for the heavens were no longer what they once were. The sky gods had reached too far, had tampered with forces they did not understand. They had become weak, their connection to the stars frayed and broken, and so the battle raged on. The earth rose up against the heavens, and the sky, once a realm of order and light, was consumed by chaos. No longer could the stars shine with the same brilliance. No longer could the winds blow with the same strength. The heavens, now fractured, seemed to mirror the god who had struck them, torn apart and undone. Kumarbi, in his rage and his triumph, saw the world change before his very eyes. The war he waged was not just against the sky gods, but against the very concept of divine order. He was not simply seeking to destroy the heavens. He was seeking to replace them, to reshape the world in his image. A world where the earth was the center, where the power of creation and destruction was no longer divided, but unified in the form of a god who could bite the sky. In the end, the war did not have a clear victor. The sky gods retreated, broken and fractured, but they did not die. The heavens were not fully destroyed, but they were forever scarred, their once great power diminished. Kumarbi, though victorious in his own way, found that the war had cost him something far greater than he had anticipated: his place in the world. The earth, though still his domain, now felt more hollow. The sky, once something to be feared, now loomed above him, a constant reminder of the divine power he could never fully control. He had bitten the sky, and in doing so, had sealed his fate. The wound in the sky, the rift created by Kumarbi's bite, has never healed. It remains, a jagged scar stretching across the heavens, a visible reminder of the god's audacity, his wrath, and his defiance. But the wound is more than just a physical mark. It is a mystery that has baffled scholars, theologians, and even the gods themselves. What is the true nature of this rift? Was it merely an act of rage, or was it something more, a sign of the cosmic order unraveling, an omen of the world's eventual collapse? Over the centuries, many have sought answers, but the wound remains an enigma, its meaning slipping further from grasp with each passing age. Some claim it is a divine punishment, a mark of Kumarbi's rebellion that cannot be undone. Others whisper that it is not a wound at all, but a door, a portal to something greater, something beyond the reach of mortal understanding. One of the greatest mysteries surrounding the wound is its strange and unsettling effect on time. The gods who once watched over the heavens and the earth, now broken and retreating into shadow, have long been silent on the matter. Yet there are those who believe that time itself is not what it once was, that the wound in the sky is somehow tied to the very fabric of reality. Scholars speak of time slipping through cracks, of days stretching and contracting in unnatural ways, as if the flow of existence itself is being altered by the scar left in the heavens. In the years following Kumarbi's war, the stars, once reliable beacons of navigation, began to behave erratically. Some appeared to vanish from the sky altogether, while others appeared in places they should not have been. Constellations, once fixed and unchanging, now flickered like dying embers, their shapes shifting and warping as though the very constellations were struggling to hold their form. The gods of the sky, who had once known the heavens and all their glory, found themselves powerless against the changes. They tried, in vain, to restore order, but the damage done by Kumarbi's bite was too profound, too far-reaching. They began to speak in whispers, warning those who would listen that the rift was not just a wound, but a tear in the very structure of the world. The heavens were unraveling, and with it, so too were the laws of reality itself. Among the mortal realm, the rift became a symbol, a sign that something far greater was at play. The people, who had once worshipped the sky gods, turned their attention to Kumarbi. Some believed that he was the key to understanding the mystery. Was he the god who had broken the heavens, or had he merely unlocked something much darker, much older? The legends grew, each more fantastical than the last, and still no one had answers. But the rift, in its unyielding silence, beckoned. Those who were brave or perhaps foolish enough to seek its source often found themselves lost, swallowed by the vastness of the void. A strange compulsion seemed to draw them toward it, as though the wound itself was calling out to them. Some disappeared without a trace, their fates sealed by the pull of the sky's wound. Others returned, but they were never the same. Their minds were fractured, their eyes haunted by the visions they had glimpsed within the rift. It is said that those who gaze upon the wound too long are doomed to see things that no mortal should witness. Glimpses of the past and the future, of worlds that were never meant to exist, of gods who should have been forgotten. These visions drive men to madness, and it is this madness that has kept the mystery of the rift alive for so long. The gods, the scholars, the seekers, none have ever been able to answer the question: what is the true nature of the wound. Some suggest that the rift is a manifestation of the struggle between creation and destruction. Kumarbi, in his fury, did not merely bite the sky, he shattered the balance of the cosmos itself. The wound is not just a scar. It is a rupture in the very fabric of reality, an opening to the forces that lie beyond the known universe. It is said that what lies beyond the rift is not merely a void, but a place where the rules of existence do not apply. Some call it the Great Chaos, a realm where time has no meaning and where the gods themselves are powerless. There are others who argue that the rift is a divine punishment, a warning to those who would dare challenge the order of the cosmos. The gods above, in their fury, may have created the rift as a testament to Kumarbi's rebellion, a wound that will never heal, a reminder of the price of defiance. If this is true, then the sky gods are not merely hiding from the earth. They are trapped, bound by the very scar that Kumarbi left behind. They have no power to close the wound, for it is tied to the very essence of their authority. And to do so would mean unraveling everything they have built. But the mystery of the rift goes beyond even the gods' comprehension. It is a question that no one, mortal or divine, can answer. So, the wound remains, a constant presence in the sky, a scar that will never fade, a rift that has shattered the heavens and twisted the fabric of time. And with it, the myth of Kumarbi continues to linger, forever entwined with the wound he created. Perhaps one day, the truth will be revealed. But until then, the rift remains, its secrets locked away in the depths of the sky, waiting for something to finally understand the true cost of defying the heavens. As the rift in the sky widened, so too did the shadows that followed Kumarbi's every movement. What began as a solitary fracture in the heavens quickly spread, seeping into the very fabric of the world. The earth, once full of life and light, began to grow darker, as if the gods' touch had tainted everything it came into contact with. The heavens were no longer the bright expanse they once were. The stars, once steady and faithful, flickered weakly, as though caught in a dying dance. But it was not just the sky that had changed. Something deeper, something more sinister, had begun to stir beneath the surface. The devouring darkness was not merely a byproduct of the gods' bite, but a force unto itself, shadow-born of the rift, feeding off the chaos that Kumarbi had unleashed. The followers of the earth god, once blinded by the glory of their god's triumph, now began to feel the weight of the darkness closing in around them. They had called upon Kumarbi for power, for strength, and they had received it but in the bargain. They had unknowingly invited something far more dangerous into their lives. It is said that the darkness is not a physical entity, but a presence, a growing force that consumes all it touches. The followers of Kumarbi began to notice subtle changes in themselves. At first imperceptible, but gradually becoming more pronounced. Their hearts began to grow heavier, their minds clouded with strange thoughts. The more they sought the gods' blessing, the more they felt the pull of the darkness, a hunger, an insatiable void that began to swallow up their very souls. Some of the worshippers began to vanish. At first it was a few here and there, their disappearances attributed to the dangers of the earth itself, the caves, the chasms, the deep places where even the bravest souls dared not venture. But as time passed, the disappearances grew more frequent, and those who ventured into the deep, shadowed places where Kumarbi was worshipped would often return, changed, twisted, hollow. Their eyes were no longer the same, their faces were gaunt, their movements jerky and unnatural. The followers, once full of life and devotion, began to look as though something was slowly eating away at them, eroding their very essence. And they would speak of the darkness, the devouring void that lurked just beyond the reach of their vision, gnawing at their thoughts, whispering in their ears. It was not the god himself, but something far older, far darker. Some spoke of it as a curse, others as a punishment for their worship. In the deepest corners of their caves, where the earth's roots twisted, and the very air seemed to choke with the weight of centuries, the followers began to perform more desperate rituals, desperate for protection, for respite from the insidious force that was overtaking them. They sought to appease Kumarbi in new ways. They sacrificed more than blood. Now they sacrificed their memories, their identities, their very humanity. They would chant his name in the darkness, offering up their souls as fuel for the gods' insatiable hunger. But this only fed the darkness more. The shadows crept across the land like an ever-expanding flood, moving silently through the cracks in the earth and the sky, entering the hearts of men, women, and children alike. People began to forget things, small things at first, the kind of details one might expect to slip away over time. But soon, the memories grew more important, forgotten names, lost faces, forgotten loves and lives. And in the absence of memories, something else began to take root, a cold emptiness that spread across the land. Those who were touched by the darkness would begin to hear whispers, soft, enticing, almost seductive in their cadence. The whispers spoke of power, of a deeper connection to the God who had bitten the sky. They spoke of joining with the earth itself, of becoming one with the God's will. But those who listened too long found themselves lost. Their thoughts became fragmented, their souls shattered as the darkness slowly devoured their essence. They were not dying in the traditional sense. No, they were being consumed by something more insidious, the dark hunger of a power that had no name, no end. As the darkness grew, the world itself seemed to change. The winds no longer carried the sweet scent of rain or the warmth of the sun. The earth itself began to feel cold, sterile, as if the god's bite had severed the very connection between the land and the sky. The fields grew barren, the rivers ran dry, and the animals began to disappear. There was a sense of suffocating weight, as if the earth itself had become a tomb, slowly closing in on everything that once lived. But the devouring darkness did not simply consume life, it also consumed light. Those who gazed too long at the sky's rift began to feel the very light of the stars fading away, as though the heavens themselves were closing their eyes, shutting out the world below. The stars that once guided travelers and sailors no longer shone with the same brilliance. Some disappeared entirely, while others flickered erratically as if they, too, were struggling against the pull of the rift. The darkness, then, was not just a force, it was a harbinger of something far more terrible. The god who had bitten the sky had unleashed a primal chaos upon the world, and the darkness was its herald. It was not a punishment in the traditional sense, but a consequence of the war Kumarbi had waged. The bite had severed the connection between the heavens and the earth, and in doing so, had allowed the darkness to seep in. The sky had been torn open, and in the wake of that rupture, the world itself was beginning to unravel. The followers, trapped in the grip of this dark hunger, could only watch as their world fell apart. They had called upon Kumarbi for strength, for power, but in the end, the god's blessing had become a curse. The darkness, once an insubstantial force, was now tangible, suffocating, and relentless. And there was no escaping it. The curse that Kumarbi brought upon the stars is not one easily understood. When he tore the sky, not only did he shatter the divine order, but he also disrupted the delicate balance that had held the stars in their places. The heavens, once a perfect map of divine will and cosmic order, began to falter under the god's wrath. The stars, once beacons of hope, became distant, flickering lights, dim and erratic, as though the very fabric of existence was losing its coherence. It was said that the stars were the gods' messengers, their steady light guiding the fates of mortals and gods alike. But with Kumarbi's bite, the stars were not just dimmed, they were cursed. The rift in the sky spread like a wound through the heavens, causing the stars to flicker and fade. Some stars disappeared entirely, their light swallowed by the gaping void created by the gods' rebellion. Others, once fixed and eternal, shifted from their places, no longer following the ancient constellations that had guided sailors, travelers, and kings. The curse was subtle at first. Travelers, once guided by the steady constellations, began to lose their way. Sailors who once relied on the stars to navigate the seas found themselves adrift in uncharted waters. The stars, those eternal guides, seemed to mock their mortal attempts to understand the world, but the curse went deeper. The stars no longer served as signs of fate. They became ominous omens, shifting in unpredictable patterns. Each flicker in the night sky was a reminder of Kumarbi's power, a sign that the order of the world had been undone. The gods above, helpless to stop the curse, began to retreat further into the distant heavens, voiding the reach of the wound that Kumarbi had inflicted. They feared the rift, feared the power that could undo everything they had built. The once unified heavens began to crumble, as if the curse of the stars had infected the very hearts of the gods. The war that Kumarbi had waged was not only against the sky, it was against the entire cosmic order, and the stars were the first casualty of his rebellion. But even as the stars began to falter, there were those among the mortals who believed that the stars' curse was a sign of something greater. Scholars, priests, and mystics began to speak of a prophecy that the stars' fall was only the beginning, that the curse of Kumarbi would spread further, deeper, until it reached the very heart of creation. They spoke of a time when the stars would burn out entirely, leaving the heavens dark and silent, a void where no god would dare to tread. Some believed that the curse was a form of divine punishment, a warning to those who would defy the heavens. Others whispered that the curse was not a punishment at all, but a sign that the gods themselves had lost control, that the balance of the universe was forever altered by Kumarbi's actions. But what was certain, what was undeniable, was that the stars could no longer be trusted. Once steady and eternal, they were now a fractured reflection of the chaos Kumarbi had unleashed. In the midst of this celestial turmoil, the people began to turn away from the stars. No longer could they find their way by the constellations. No longer could they rely on the heavens to tell them what the future held. The stars, once revered as divine guides, had become symbols of loss and uncertainty. The faith of the people, long tied to the heavens, began to wither. Where once there had been reverence for the gods of the sky, there was now a growing sense of dread and disillusionment. The stars had abandoned them, just as the gods had abandoned the stars. Yet even as the stars flickered and dimmed, there were those who sought to understand the curse. Mystics and scholars gathered, searching for answers in the shifting patterns of the stars. They delved into ancient texts and into forbidden knowledge, seeking any clue as to how to reverse the curse. They spoke of rituals, of sacrifices, of ways to heal the rift in the sky. But each attempt, each prayer, each offering only seemed to deepen the mystery. The stars continued to flicker, their light growing weaker with each passing year. It was said that there were those who sought the heart of the curse itself, that they would travel to the edge of the world, to the place where the wound in the sky was said to be most potent, and they would try to mend the heavens. Some claimed that by confronting the curse directly, they could restore the stars to their former brilliance. Others, however, believed that the curse was irreversible. The heavens would never be the same again, that the stars were gone forever. But there was one thing that even the most powerful gods could not deny. The curse of Kumarbi had changed everything. The stars, once eternal, were no longer a reliable guide. The very heavens had been altered, their once steady light now flickering and fading. It was as if the gods themselves were retreating, their influence slipping away as the wound in the sky continued to expand. And so, the world below, once guided by the stars, now wandered in darkness. The people, disconnected from the divine order, began to look inward, seeking meaning in the shifting patterns of the heavens. Some believed that the curse was a sign that the end was near, that the very fabric of reality was unraveling. Others saw it as an opportunity to break free from the influence of the gods, to forge a new path unbound by the ancient laws of the cosmos. But the curse of the stars remained a constant reminder of Kumarbi. As rebellion, a reminder that the heavens had been torn asunder, and that the gods who once ruled over them were now powerless to restore what had been lost. As the heavens dimmed and the stars faltered, the search for a lost symbol began, a symbol that was believed to hold the key to understanding Kumarbi's wrath and the curse he had placed upon the sky. It was an ancient symbol, older than the gods themselves, one that once illuminated the path to power and wisdom. This symbol had been forgotten by most, its true meaning lost in the annals of time. But in the wake of Kumarbi's rebellion were those who believed that finding this symbol would restore the cosmic balance, heal the wound in the sky, and even return the stars to their former brilliance. The symbol, it was said, could bind the earth and sky together, mending the rift created by Kumarbi's bite. It was the key to understanding the true nature of the curse and how it could be undone. Some believed it was a gift from the first gods, a divine artifact that had been hidden away, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Others whispered that the symbol was not just a tool of restoration, but a weapon power so great that its discovery would shift the balance of the universe itself. The search for this symbol became an obsession for many. Scholars, mystics, and even desperate rulers turned their eyes toward the heavens, believing that the symbol could be found in the very stars that had been corrupted by Kumarbi's bite. They studied the shifting patterns of the sky, seeking any trace of the ancient mark. But the stars, once a reliable map, had become erratic and unpredictable. The heavens themselves seemed to be hiding the symbol, as if the curse had made it impossible for anyone to find it. Yet despite the challenges, a few devoted followers of Kumarbi believed that the symbol was not hidden in the stars at all, but rather buried deep within the earth, within the caves and chasms where the god himself had first been worshipped. These followers, fueled by desperation and a deep faith in their god, began to scour the land, searching for any clue that would lead them to the symbol. It was said that those who found it would gain immense power, the power to heal the sky, or perhaps to control it. They would become more than mortal. They would become gods themselves, wielding the very forces that Kumarbi had unleashed. For years, the search continued, but the symbol remained elusive. It was as if the world itself was resisting the discovery of this forgotten mark. Some believed that the gods, in their retreat from the heavens, had concealed the symbol to prevent anyone from gaining too much power, for fear of what might happen if the balance was restored. Others whispered that the symbol had been destroyed long ago, wiped from existence to ensure that no mortal or god could ever undo the damage Kumarbi had caused. And yet, even in the face of uncertainty, the belief in the symbol persisted. Those who sought it became consumed by their quest, often losing themselves in the process. Some became so obsessed that they abandoned their families, their homes, their lives. The search for the symbol became more important than anything else. It was said that many who sought it were never seen again, disappearing into the wilds, lost to the curse that had already claimed so much. But there were others who, despite the growing desperation, began to question whether the symbol even existed. Could it be that it was only a myth, a legend passed down through generations? A hope that had no real basis in truth? Was the symbol merely a figment of those who had longed for a way to undo Kumarbi's rebellion? A way to reverse the damage he had done to the heavens and the earth? Some scholars, after years of study, came to the conclusion that the symbol was not something to be found in the physical world, but rather something that had to be unlocked within the minds of those who truly understood Kumarbi's nature. They believed that the symbol was a concept, divine understanding that could not be written down or drawn on stone, but must be realized in the hearts and minds of the worthy. To find the symbol, one would need to embrace the chaos and destruction that Kumarbi had wrought. To understand that the wound in the sky was not an accident, but a necessary part of the world's evolution. Only then would the true meaning of the symbol be revealed. But as the years turned into decades, and the symbol remained unfound, the faith of the people began to wane. Many abandoned the search, believing that the world had been irrevocably changed by Kumarbi's rebellion and that there was no going back. The heavens had been torn apart and the stars had been dimmed. There was no cure for the curse, no way to undo the damage that had been done. The sky was broken and the gods had retreated into silence. Yet for a few, the search never ended. In the darkness of their caves, in the silence of their temples, the believers still prayed. They still whispered the ancient chants, hoping that one day, the symbol would reveal itself, that the key to the heavens and to the healing of the world would be found. But as the rift in the sky remained wide and the stars flickered like dying embers, the question lingered in the hearts of all who sought it. Would the lost symbol ever be found? Or had it too been consumed by the darkness that Kumarbi had unleashed upon the world? In the aftermath of Kumarbi's rebellion, the earth and heavens lay in a state of uneasy silence. The sky, once filled with celestial harmony, now stretched above in fractured disarray, its stars dimming like the last flickering embers of a dying fire. The earth, too, had felt the sting of the god's bite. The once vibrant lands had become barren in places. The rivers no longer flowing with the same clarity, the winds that once carried the sense of life now carrying only dust. The gods who had once ruled the heavens, those who held dominion over the stars and the winds, fled. They retreated into the furthest corners of the celestial realm, hiding from the god who had dared to bite the sky, leaving the heavens to fade into a strange, perpetual twilight. Their absence left a profound emptiness, one that extended from the heavens down to the earth, where Kumarbi's followers remained, their spirits fractured by the very god they had once worshipped. Those who had once sung praises to Kumarbi now found themselves caught in a silence far deeper than the one that had preceded his arrival. The temples that had once reverberated with the sounds of devotion and ritual now stood abandoned, their altars cold and forgotten. The followers who had once believed in Kumarbi's power, who had basked in the glow of the god's favor, were left with nothing but the ruins of their faith. Some, desperate to hold on to the divine connection they had once felt, continued to worship in the shadows. They gathered in caves, in the deep recesses of the earth, where the weight of the sky above could not crush them. But their prayers had lost the same fervor, and the blessings they had once received seemed to fade with each passing day. The earth itself seemed to mourn alongside them, its cracks growing wider, its tremors more frequent, as though it too had lost something precious. As the years passed, the followers began to dwindle. Those who remained were no longer the same. They had been hollowed out by the absence of Kumarbi's presence, by the curse that now gripped their world. Some had gone mad, their minds consumed by the darkness that had spread in the wake of Kumarbi's bite. They had heard whispers from the rift, voices that promised power, but at a terrible cost. The darkness promised them everything and nothing, and those who sought it were often lost to it forever. Others had left the faith altogether, seeking solace in the remnants of the old sky gods or in other, less well-known deities. They turned their backs on Kumarbi and his broken heavens, hoping that perhaps in a different god, they could find the salvation that had once been promised. But nothing felt the same. The air was heavy with a sense of loss. And even those who sought a new path could not escape the weight of the curse that lingered over the earth. The greatest tragedy, however, lay in the silence that hung over the followers of Kumarbi. They were no longer the fierce, devoted worshippers who had once sought power through the god's blessings. They had become quiet, lost in their own exile, abandoned by the god they had called their own. They had once believed that they could stand beside Kumarbi, that they could join with him in his war against the sky gods. But now, they were left with nothing but the remnants of their devotion. And yet, despite the growing emptiness, there were whispers of those who still sought Kumarbi's return, who still believed that the god would rise again, that the wound in the sky would be healed. These whispers were faint, carried on the wind, lost in the silence of the world. Some even claimed to have had visions of Kumarbi's return, visions of the god's great form, standing at the edge of the rift, his teeth bared, ready to strike once more. They spoke of a prophecy that said the god would return when the heavens were finally broken beyond repair, when the last star had faded and the earth had fallen into shadow. But whether these were true visions or the fevered dreams of those who still longed for the god's return, no one could say for certain. The silence of the world was all-encompassing, and as the years turned into centuries, the story of Kumarbi faded into myth, becoming nothing more than a distant memory, a tale told in hushed tones around flickering fires, a warning to those who dared to challenge the gods above. The gods of the sky, too, had fallen silent. Their retreat into the farthest reaches of the heavens, leaving the world to drift in an uneasy stillness. The rift in the sky remained ever present, a scar upon the heavens. But no divine voice would speak to those who still looked to the stars for answers. The gods who had once been protectors now seemed as distant as the stars themselves, their power waning, their influence slipping into obscurity. Kumarbi's name, once shouted in defiance and reverence, was now nothing more than a whisper, a faded echo in the dark corners of the earth. The followers who had once held him as their god had now become ghosts themselves, lost in the silence they had created. Their temples lay in ruin, their prayers unanswered. The god who had once bitten the sky, who had brought chaos to the heavens, was now lost to time, a distant memory, a forgotten deity, whose wrath had changed the world forever. And so, the world moved on, drifting in the wake of Kumarbi's rebellion. World that no longer knew where the stars had gone or where the gods had fled. But the silence of the heavens and the earth remained, a reminder of the price paid for defying the divine order. As the years stretched on, the wound in the sky remained, its jagged edges a constant reminder of the world's fracture. The wound did not heal, nor did it close. It merely existed, an open, bleeding gash in the heavens that nobody could repair. But it was not just the physical wound that caused unease among those who still remembered the God who had torn it open. It was the madness that seemed to follow it, a quiet insanity that began to seep into the minds of mortals and gods alike. The rift in the sky, once an awe-inspiring testament to Kumarbi's power, had begun to warp time and space. The stars flickered like dying candles, their light growing weak, erratic. The constellations that once guided the lost were now nothing more than vague shapes, indistinct, as though they had been drawn with trembling hands. The sky itself seemed to shimmer and crack, the air vibrating with an almost palpable sense of wrongness. As the sky twisted and warped, so did the minds of those who stared too long at it. The great seers, who once gazed into the heavens to predict the future, now spoke of visions that were not visions at all, but maddening glimpses of a world that could no longer be understood. They spoke of dark forms lurking beyond the stars, of an eternal void just outside the rift, where time did not exist, and where all things gods men and stars alike would eventually be swallowed. Their words were cryptic, haunting, and their followers, once devoted, began to question whether they were hearing prophecies, or simply the ramblings of those who had lost their sanity to the void in the sky. Some, driven by curiosity, ventured closer to the rift, hoping to understand what lay beyond it. They sought answers in the crack that had opened up in the heavens, thinking perhaps the truth of the world could be found in the remnants of the gods' rebellion. Those who ventured too close often never returned. Those few who did were not the same. Their eyes were hollow, their bodies trembling, their minds fractured. They spoke of darkness and of voices that called to them from the other side, voices that promised knowledge, but at a terrible cost. The rift itself, some whispered, had become a portal, but not to another world. Rather, it was a door to madness. The sky's tier had fractured not only the heavens, but the very boundaries of sanity itself. Those who looked too deeply into it risked losing themselves, their minds unhinged by what they saw, trapped in visions of the cosmic void that stretched infinitely beyond the stars. It is said that the madness spread like a sickness, creeping across the land. Those who came in contact with those who had gazed too long at the rift would soon begin to hear the same voices. They would begin to see the same disturbing visions. The stars flickering and dimming, the void behind the rift pulling at the edges of their perception. At night they would wake from dreams of falling through endless darkness, never reaching the ground. And yet, despite the madness that consumed those who came near the rift, there were still those who sought the truth. They believed that if they could understand what lay beyond the wound in the sky, they could somehow undo the curse, restore the stars, and heal the heavens. But what they found was not clarity, but more madness. The rift, in all its chaotic beauty, seemed to exist not just outside the world, but within it. It was as if the very fabric of the universe had been cracked, and the pieces were beginning to slip away. The gods, in their retreat, had left behind only fragments of their power, leaving the world to drift in a strange cosmic limbo. Time itself seemed to warp. Days stretched longer, and nights grew darker. The natural order seemed to break down, as though the very foundations of existence were coming undone. The people who still remembered Kumarbi's rebellion began to speak of a final prophecy, one whispered by the last surviving seers. It spoke of the day when the rift would fully open, when the heavens and the earth would finally collapse into one. The god who had bitten the sky would return, but not in the form they had once imagined. He would not return to restore order, but to finish the destruction he had begun to bring about the end of the world itself. It was a dark prophecy, one that no one wanted to believe. Yet, as the years passed and the madness of the sky's tier grew stronger, the people began to wonder if it was true. The earth trembled with strange, unexplained quakes. The stars grew dimmer, their once brilliant light fading with each passing night. It was as if the rift, the wound in the sky, was slowly consuming everything: time, space, the very essence of life itself. Those who had once worshipped Kumarbi, who had believed in his power, began to lose hope. The god they had followed had brought them nothing but chaos, madness, and despair. His bite had torn the heavens, and in doing so, had torn apart the fabric of the world. The curse of the sky's wound was not one that could be undone by prayer or ritual. It was a curse that would only grow stronger, until the world was swallowed entirely by the madness of the void, And still, the rift remained, its edges growing ever more jagged, its presence an eternal reminder of the god's wrath. Those who dared to look at it too long were never the same. Those who believed the prophecy began to wonder if they too were doomed to fall into madness. And in the silence of the world, the voices from beyond the rift began to call louder, promising something darker still. For in the madness of the sky's tear, the end was not just a possibility, it was a certainty. The rift in the sky, long regarded as a scar from a forgotten war, grew ever wider as time spiraled into a place where reason no longer seemed to hold sway. The very fabric of reality had been tainted by Kumarbi's bite, and now, centuries later, the consequences were becoming unbearable. The madness that had gripped the earth in the aftermath of his rebellion had not subsided, but had instead festered, spreading throughout the world like an illness that could not be healed. It was said that those who dwelled too long in the shadow of the rift would eventually lose themselves completely. Some had sought it out for the power they believed it could offer, believing they might control the darkness that lay beyond, but none had returned unchanged. The very air around the rift seemed charged with an energy that warped the mind and soul, pulling at the hearts of those who dared to stand beneath its gaze. It was a silent call, a whisper that begged for attention, a warning and a promise wrapped into one. The followers who still clung to the belief that Kumarbi's return would restore the heavens to their former order found themselves plagued by strange visions. The once quiet madness began to manifest more openly, as if the sky itself were rebelling against the world. In dreams, they saw the rift glowing with an unearthly light, beckoning them forward. Those who resisted found their minds increasingly fragile, their sanity slipping as the call from the rift grew louder, more insistent. But there was another phenomenon, one that could not be ignored. The earth itself had begun to react to the rift as if the very world had become aware of its presence. Earthquakes and storms, violent and unrelenting, had become more frequent, shaking the lands that had once been stable and untouched by such chaos. The natural order, the seasons, the rhythms of life, all seemed to be unraveling. It was as if Kumarbi's bite had pierced not only the heavens, but the heart of the earth itself, and now the world was paying the price. The stars, those once reliable guides, were now nothing more than distant specks of light, flickering as if they too were afraid of what was to come. It was said that on certain nights, when the sky was dark enough, the rift would pulse, a subtle glow that seemed to call out to the lost, to those who still remembered the old gods. Those who dared look too long were said to fall into a trance, their minds drawn to the void beyond the sky, to the depths where Kumarbi had once risen. The prophecy, which had been dismissed as a myth, began to gain credence among the most devout of Kumarbi's followers. They spoke of the day when the rift would open fully, when the heavens would collapse and the earth would be consumed by the darkness. That had already begun to seep into the world. The return of Kumarbi was no longer just a question of whether it would happen, but of when and whether anyone could survive it. In the deepest corners of the earth, those who still believed in the god of destruction prepared. They gathered in hidden caverns, in ancient temples buried beneath the weight of time, where the walls themselves seemed to hum with an energy that mirrored the pulse of the rift. They performed dark rituals, seeking to hasten the return of Kumarbi. They believed that by invoking his name and offering their devotion, they could bring the god back, free him from the prison of silence he had been forced into by his own rebellion. They were not afraid of the madness, nor of the destruction that would follow. They welcomed it. The world, however, was not as eager for Kumarbi's return. Those who still clung to the old sky gods, those who had never forgotten the brightness of the stars, began to see the unraveling of the world for what it truly was, the beginning of the end. The sky had already torn, the stars were fading, and the earth itself was beginning to crumble under the weight of Kumarbi's curse. They knew that if the god returned now, there would be nothing left for him to claim, for the very fabric of existence was already dying. And yet, despite the growing chaos, the belief in the god's return did not waver. The followers continued their dark rites, invoking the god's name with fervor, their chants echoing through the empty, crumbling temples. They believed that only by embracing the destruction Kumarbi had wrought could they restore the balance that had been lost. But as they chanted, as they prepared for the god's return, they could feel it, a subtle shift in the air, a tension that ran through the earth, through their very bones. The wound in the sky was growing wider still. The once noble stars now seemed to bend toward it, as if they were being drawn into the void, their light flickering as if to signal the world's approaching collapse. The earth trembled beneath the weight of the god's influence, and the followers knew that their prayers were not in vain. Kumarbi was coming, and with him, everything that had been torn asunder would be devoured by the chaos he had unleashed. The sky, once the domain of the gods, was no longer theirs. The earth, no longer a place of life, had become a battleground, where the forces of creation and destruction were locked in a battle for dominance. And at the center of it all was Kumarbi, God who had bitten the sky, the God who had brought the heavens to their knees, and the God who now stood poised to finish what he had started. For those who had long worshipped him, the return of Kumarbi was not something to fear, but to embrace. They believed that only through his final, complete destruction could the world be restored, reborn in the God's image. But for the rest of the world, it was the final warning. The end was near, and there was nothing left to do but wait for the heavens to fall. The words of Kumarbi were once sacred, carried through whispers from those who had followed him in the earliest days of his rebellion. To speak his name was to defy the heavens themselves, and those who did were often hunted by the gods of the sky, erased from history, their names forever lost. But in the wake of Kumarbi's bite, in the years following his retreat into silence, there emerged a heresy, one that threatened to undo everything the gods had once built, to turn the world back to chaos. This heresy was born not of blood or ritual, but of knowledge, ancient, forbidden knowledge that had been hidden by the gods for millennia. It was said that within the sacred texts of Kumarbi's earliest worshippers, there lay a word, a language so ancient and powerful that to utter it would shake the very foundation of the heavens. This word was not a name nor a prayer, but a command, a key to unlocking the power of the rift, to drawing down the forces that lay beyond the stars. The heretics who first found this word were scholars, those who had long studied the writings of Kumarbi's first followers. They found the traces of it buried within the ruins of lost temples, etched into the walls of forgotten caverns where the light of the heavens could not reach. It was said to be a single word, a syllable so ancient that even the gods themselves had forgotten it. It was a word of power, a word that could call forth the forces that Kumarbi had once wielded in his rebellion against the heavens. At first, the word was only whispered, passed from one scholar to another, hidden away in the darkness. But as the rift in the sky grew wider and the madness of the curse spread, the heretics began to see the truth of what they had uncovered. The word was more than just a key, it was the language of the gods, the language of creation itself. To speak, it was to awaken something ancient, something that had been sealed away for eternity. And so, the heretics began to speak the word, slowly, at first one syllable at a time. They would gather in secret places, in the shadows of ruined temples or beneath the crumbling peaks of mountains, where the earth itself seemed to hum with energy, would speak the word in whispers, barely audible, as if afraid that the very act of uttering it would bring down divine wrath. But as they spoke it, they felt the power begin to stir. The earth trembled beneath their feet, the air grew thick with an unseen energy, and the rift in the sky seemed to pulse as though it were listening. The gods of the sky, who had once sought to erase Kumarbi's name from history, felt the stirrings of the heresy. The very act of speaking the word was enough to tear at the fabric of the heavens, to awaken the power that had been dormant for so long. They knew what it meant, that if the word were spoken in full, the heavens would be undone. The rift would widen further still, and the world would be swallowed by the forces that Kumarbi had set in motion. The very existence of the sky, the earth, and all things between them would be torn apart, consumed by the madness that had been born with the gods' rebellion. But it was too late to stop it. The heretics, now fully immersed in the power of the word, began to speak it with increasing confidence. They spoke it as a command, a chant that drew forth the forces of creation and destruction. The very act of speaking it seemed to warp the world around them, pulling the heavens closer to the earth, distorting the fabric of time and space itself. The distant heavens, the gods of the sky, began to stir. They had retreated, hiding from Kumarbi's wrath. But now, they felt the power of the heretics' language, felt it pulling at the very core of their existence. The gods, unable to stop it, began to whisper among themselves, speaking in the same ancient language that the heretics had uncovered, but it was not enough. The power of the word had already taken root. As the heretics continued to speak, the rift in the sky began to widen, not just in a physical sense, but in a metaphysical one. The heavens themselves began to crack, the very laws that governed them starting to break down. Time no longer flowed as it should. The stars flickered and shifted, and the earth too began to tremble, its foundations shaking beneath the weight of the growing power. In the heart of the earth, in the deep caverns where Kumarbi had once been worshipped, a dark energy began to surge. The followers who had long since abandoned hope felt it first. They felt the god stirring within them, awakening from the silence he had been cast into. The word of the heretics was not just a key to the heavens, it was a summons. Kumarbi was rising once again. The rift in the sky pulsed with a violent force, and those who had once been close to the god could feel the power surging through them. The rift, now fully opened, was no longer just a mark of destruction, it was a doorway. Those who had spoken the word now stood on the edge of the unknown, gazing into the vast, chaotic emptiness that lay beyond the rift. It was a place where the gods no longer held sway, a place where only primal forces could rule. And then, the word was spoken in full. The world trembled. The sky itself seemed to split open, the heavens collapsing into the earth. The stars fell, one by one, their light consumed by the growing darkness. The madness that had plagued the world for so long reached its climax. The forces that Kumarbi had once unleashed were now fully awake, and the world was no longer a place of order. It had become a place of chaos, a place where the gods had no power, and the very fabric of existence was unraveled. In the final moments, as the last of the stars fell, and the earth shook beneath the weight of the gods' rebellion, the heretics stood at the center of it all. They had spoken the word, and now they, too, were consumed by the power they had awakened. Their bodies were swallowed by the rift, their minds lost to the darkness that had risen from it. And with them, the world torn apart by Kumarbi's curse was left to drift in the void. As the last of the heretics fell into the void, consumed by the power they had awakened, the world held its breath. The rift in the sky, once a jagged scar from Kumarbi's rebellion, now stretched wide, a gaping wound that seemed to pulse with dark energy. The stars had been swallowed, the constellations twisted beyond recognition, and the earth trembled beneath the weight of what was unfolding. In that moment of silence, something began to stir in the depths of the rift. A force, ancient and primal, began to move, an energy so potent and untamed that it felt as though it could bend time itself. The air crackled with electricity, and the very fabric of reality seemed to shift, as if the boundaries between the known world and the unknown were beginning to blur. The rift was no longer just a tear in the heavens. It was a portal, a threshold between worlds, and from beyond it, something was emerging. At first, it was only a shadow, an indistinct shape that flickered at the edges of the rift. But as the moments passed, the shape grew clearer, more defined. It was massive, beyond anything mortal minds could comprehend. A being formed not of flesh, but of raw primordial energy. This was no god of the heavens or the earth. This was Kumarbi in his true form. His presence was overwhelming, like the earth itself had come alive, shifting and growing beneath his feet. His body was an amalgamation of stone and shadow, his limbs enormous and jagged, as though carved from the very rocks of the earth. His face, if it could be called a face, was a shifting mass of energy and void, eyes that seemed to pulse with the power of the sky's wound, deep and unfathomable. His form was both immense and fluid, ever-changing, as though he existed in a state beyond mortal comprehension. Kumarbi's true form was not bound by the laws of creation. He was a being of pure force, a primal god whose very existence was the embodiment of chaos and creation entwined. He was not a god of light nor of darkness. He was the force that drove the universe itself, the heartbeat of the earth, the rage of the sky, and the silence of the void. He had no need for worshippers, no need for sacrifices. He was power incarnate, and he was the origin of both the heavens and the earth. As Kumarbi stepped forward, the earth beneath him cracked, the ground breaking apart as though it could no longer bear his weight. Mountains fell, oceans boiled, and the winds screamed in agony. The world itself seemed to bend, as if the very laws of nature could not withstand the presence of the god who had torn apart the sky. It was said that when Kumarbi walked, the ground would tremble in fear, for the earth itself knew what he was capable of. But it was not just the earth that trembled. The heavens too began to shift, as if they were aware of the god's return. The rift in the sky, once a mere tear, now seemed to grow, its edges rippling with dark energy. It was as though the universe itself was trying to tear itself apart, unable to contain the power that had been unleashed. The stars, which had once guided mortals, now flickered in terror, their light slowly being drained by Kumarbi's presence. And then the god spoke. His voice was not a voice at all, it was a force, a vibration that echoed not in the ears, but in the very bones of those who still dared to listen. It was a sound that reached into the depths of the soul, shaking the foundations of belief itself. "I am the earth," Kumarbi's voice reverberated, words themselves seeming to tear through the very fabric of existence. "I am the sky. I am the wound that cannot heal, the force that will never be undone. I have bitten the heavens, and now I shall devour them." With that, Kumarbi raised his massive hand toward the sky, and the rift in the heavens seemed to respond, stretching further still, the tear growing wider and deeper, as if the universe itself were being split open. The stars, once so steadfast, now seemed to implode, their light sucked into the void beyond. The rift, now a black hole in the fabric of reality, seemed to draw everything in, its power beyond comprehension. Those who had once followed Kumarbi, those who had believed in his return, watched in awe and terror as the god's power unfolded before them. The sky, once a symbol of divine order, was now a battlefield. The forces of creation and destruction locked in a struggle that no one could comprehend. The earth shook, the sky wept, and the stars fell silent. But even as Kumarbi's true form stood at the center of it all, a strange sense of finality began to take hold. The earth, the sky, and all the realms in between seemed to reach a tipping point. As if they could no longer sustain the force that had been unleashed, the rift in the sky, once a symbol of power and defiance, now seemed to be consuming itself, drawing everything into its chaotic center. And yet, despite the destruction, despite the unraveling of the cosmos, Kumarbi stood unfazed. He was not a god of mercy, nor of justice. He was a god of chaos, of primal creation and destruction, and in that moment, he had become the very force that governed the universe. The world was no longer his. To rule it was his to consume, to shape, to remake in his image. For those who had worshipped him, who had believed in his power, the final truth was clear. Kumarbi had not come to restore balance. He had come to finish what he had started, to undo the world, to return it to the primal chaos from which it had been born. And in that chaos, there would be no order, no gods, no sky. There would be only Kumarbi, in his true form eternal, unyielding and absolute. The world had not yet fully grasped the magnitude of what was happening. The gods had abandoned it, the stars had been consumed, and the very fabric of existence was being torn apart by the sheer force of Kumarbi's presence. As he stood at the heart of the rift, his immense form casting a shadow over the world, a strange, oppressive silence began to settle over the earth. The earth itself seemed to hesitate, as though it were aware that something final was happening. The tremors that had once shaken the land with fury were now subdued, almost as though the planet itself was preparing for something inevitable, something beyond comprehension. The winds had ceased their howling. Even the oceans, which had once been as wild as the gods themselves, now lay still, their waves frozen in time. The sky, once a realm of infinite possibility, now stood as a gaping wound, torn open and bleeding light. Kumarbi, the god who had bitten the sky, had returned not to reclaim the heavens, but to annihilate them. His power had swept through the world like a storm, and now the world lay on the edge of a precipice. It was as though the god had become the embodiment of entropy, a force of nature that could not be resisted. The very air had thickened with the weight of his presence, and the ground beneath him seemed to bow in submission. In the final moments, as the rift continued to widen and the darkness of the void beyond began to consume the heavens. The followers who had once worshipped Kumarbi gathered. They had always known that their god was not a savior, but a destroyer. Yet they had believed that through his destruction, a new world would be born, one ruled by chaos, free from the constraints of the old gods and the laws of the heavens. But even as they chanted in the shadows, their voices trembling with anticipation, they could feel the emptiness closing in around them. Kumarbi's true form did not need to speak further. His presence alone was enough to send the world into a final, inevitable descent. He had come not to reclaim dominion, but to return everything to the primordial chaos from which it had sprung. Time, space, reality itself seemed to unravel. The ground, once solid, now seemed to ripple like water, the boundaries of the physical world fading as the universe slipped into madness. There was no battle, no final clash of gods, no heroic sacrifice. There was only silence, and immense, suffocating silence that filled the universe with an unspoken truth. Nothing would remain, no gods, no mortals, no world. Only the echo of Kumarbi's defiance, the final act of a god who had torn apart the sky to bring the universe to its knees. The followers, those who had once believed in his power, watched as the heavens fell silent. The world, now a distorted reflection of its former self, seemed to collapse into itself, as though it were caught in an endless loop of destruction and rebirth. The rift in the sky pulsed, its dark energy flooding the earth, and for the first time, it seemed that even Kumarbi himself had been consumed by the very forces he had unleashed. As the earth trembled one final time, the rift widened to an unimaginable size. The stars, once so steady, were now lost, their light extinguished as the void swallowed them whole. The winds, once the breath of the gods, fell silent, and the oceans, once as wild as the god of the earth, stood still, frozen in the moment of finality. Time itself seemed to stretch, as though it were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable conclusion. And then there was nothing. In the final silence, as the rift continued to grow, the world began to fade. The earth, the sky, the stars, and even the gods, everything became consumed by the very force that had been unleashed. The world had returned to chaos, to the void from which it had been born. There was no longer any distinction between earth and sky, between creation and destruction. Everything had become one, eternal and formless, beyond the grasp of mortal understanding. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. And then, as though it had never existed at all, it was gone. There are more gods, Kumarbi had whispered in the beginning, but only for those who truly listen. In the final silence, that truth was all that remained. The gods were gone, the world had been undone, and the rift in the sky had consumed everything, leaving nothing but the echoes of a forgotten god who had bitten the sky. If your candle hasn't gone out, the voice whispered once more, then you're probably ready for the next god. The journey, the rise and fall of Kumarbi, the gods, and the universe itself has concluded. But in the vastness of the cosmos, the silence does not last forever. There is always more to uncover, more forgotten names and lost deities, whose stories still whisper through the void. Even as the heavens crumble and the earth disintegrates, there is always something waiting to be rediscovered. Always something waiting to awaken. In the end, the remnants of the old gods, their names, their powers, their mistakes, linger in the air. In the bones of the world, and in the forgotten spaces between time, what once was has passed, but the story of Kumarbi is just one of many. There are others waiting in the darkness, waiting to emerge, to break free from the silence that now defines the cosmos. And so, if your candle hasn't gone out, then you're probably ready for the next god, the next whisper, older still, but only for those who truly listen.